The rain had been falling since dawn, and by the time the black carriage turned into the drive of Wren's Hollow, the gravel was a river, and the hem of her only good gown was black to the knee. Honora Fairbairn stood beneath the porch of a house that had, until 3 days ago, been her father's, and watched the horses come. She did not step forward to greet them. She had not yet decided whether she would. The porch roof had a leak above the second lintel that spilled a slow, cold thread down the stone at her back, and she stood in exactly the place where the water did not reach, which was the sort of small competence she had begun, in these last years, to take a private pride in the noticing of where one might stand and not be further diminished. A man got down from the carriage in a caped greatcoat, too fine for the weather he had ridden through, and the first thing she saw of him was not his face but his hands, ungloved despite the cold, red at the knuckles, the hands of a man who had held reins himself for the last stage rather than trust a coachman. He did not look up at the house. He looked instead at the drive, and the drainage of it, and the lean of the yews, and then at the porch roof, and only after all of that did he look at her. "Miss Fairbairn," he said. "Your Grace," she answered, because his card had been on the tray in the hall for 2 hours, and she had had that long to arrange her face. The Duke of Ashcombe was younger than she had expected, and older than his letters. He had the composed, closed look of a man accustomed to being read and refusing to be. He had come, according to those letters, to inspect the property he was purchasing from her late father's creditors, which was to say the roof over her head, and to conclude the transaction that would leave her, on the 15th of April, a woman without a house. "You may go inside," she said. "The fire is lit in the small parlor. There is not one in the library. Is there ever? Not this season." He inclined his head, which she took as thanks or possibly as observation, and walked past her into the hall. He did not offer her his arm. She was grateful for that. She had grown over the last winter into a broad and heavy woman, a tall woman with the plain build of her grandmother, wide at the shoulder and wider at the hip, the kind of woman upon whom silk did not drape, but sat. And she had learned to distrust the courtesies of men who did not know what to do with the sight of her. Better an honest omission than a performed gallantry. He noticed the crack in the plaster above the stair. He noticed the gap where a portrait had hung. He noticed, though she could not think how, that the third step gave under weight, and stepped over it without being told. She noticed him noticing, which was perhaps the beginning of everything, though at the time she thought only that he was a man who counted things, and men who counted things were the men who bought her father's houses out from under his daughters. In the small parlor she had laid out the papers herself. The solicitor was to come at 3. It was 2:30. The Duke stood at the window with his back to her, and she watched the rain make a moving map across the glass behind him. "I understand," he said, without turning, "that this house passes to me in April, on the 15th, and the land. All of it that my father held, which is not, as you know, all he claimed." He turned then, and the light from the window caught the side of his face, and she saw for the first time that he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the road. "Your candor is refreshing." "It is habit," she said. "I do not have the temperament for the other thing." He did not smile, but something at the corner of his mouth shifted, as though smiling had once been a language he spoke and had not spoken in a long while. She had been told by the men who came to write the inventory that her father's estate had 0 value. They had said it in front of her, twice, as though her hearing were the problem. The land was exhausted, the tenants were arrears, the timber had been sold 30 years ago, and the coppices never replanted. The mill was leased at a loss. The north field flooded every second spring. The house wanted a new roof, and would not have one. 0 value, they had said, and then had added, more quietly, that the Duke of Ashcombe was buying it anyway for reasons no one could quite name, and that Miss Fairbairn ought to be grateful, though what she ought to be grateful for they did not specify. She had not been grateful. She had been, if anything, precisely angry. It is one thing, child, to be told your father has ruined you. It is another to be told, in the same breath, that the ruin is not even interesting. Miss Fairbairn, the Duke said now, and he was looking at her directly, which she had not expected. May I ask what arrangements you have made for yourself? You may ask, but you will not answer. I have not yet decided the answer. He took that in. He did not, as many men did, try to fill the silence that followed. He let it lie between them like a third occupant of the room, and she found, unexpectedly, that she preferred him for it. My cousin in York, she said at last, because she owed him something for the silence. She has written that there is a room. There is not in fact a room, but there is a hall with a curtain across it. And she has 3 daughters and a husband who is fond of gin. I have not yet written back. I see. I doubt it, your grace. But it is polite of you to say so. Now he did smile. It was the smallest movement of the mouth. Gone before she could be sure of it, but she was sure of it, and it altered the room. He crossed to the table and looked down at the papers she had laid out, the deed, the schedule of debts, the tenants' rolls, the field maps her father had drawn himself in a firmer hand than his last years admitted of. He read them, the way she had seen her father read a wine list, without hurry, and after some time he said, "Who drew these maps? My father, when he still could. And who kept the rolls, when he could not? I did." His finger stopped on a column of figures. "In this hand. In that hand." "For how long?" "6 years, your grace." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "They are competent." She almost laughed. It came up her throat and she caught it at the back of her teeth. Competent. It was the word men used when they had expected incompetence and been mildly disappointed. She said evenly, "Thank you." He looked up at her then, and there was something in his face, a readjustment, a small correction, the look of a man who had walked into a room expecting one piece of furniture and found another. And she thought, quite calmly, so that is what it looks like when a man revises his opinion of you in real time. She had never seen it before at close range. She filed it away. The solicitor came at 3. The papers were read. The Duke signed. She signed. The rain went on. When she rose to see him out, he stopped in the hall with his hat in his hand, and said without preamble, "Miss Fairbairn, may I write to you before April?" "About what, your grace?" "About the land? There are matters I should like to understand better before I take possession, and you are the person who understands them." "You may write," she said, "though I do not know what use I shall be to you once I have gone to York." "Do not," he said, "go to York." She looked at him. The rain was very loud on the porch behind him. He had said it without emphasis, in the same flat considered voice he had used for everything else, and yet the 4 words hung in the hall like a bell just struck. "That is not," she said carefully, "a matter you may direct. No, it is not. I misspoke." "You did not misspeak, your grace. You spoke plainly. It is only that I have not yet earned the right to be spoken to plainly by a duke." He put on his hat. "You have had that right, Miss Fairbairn, since you told me the library was not heated." And then he was down the porch, and into the carriage, and the rain took him, and she was standing in the hall of a house that no longer belonged to her, watching a leak from the second lintel find the flagstones as it had done every March for as long as she could remember. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the narrow bed her mother had died in and listened to the house make its winter noises. And she thought about the way he had looked at the maps, and the way he had said her hand was competent, and the way, when he had told her not to go to York, he had not once looked away from her face. And she thought, because she was a practical woman, and it did not do to let hope in without inspecting it first. Men do not always mean what they seem to mean, and dukes least of all. And there is a great deal of daylight between not wishing a woman ill and wishing her particularly well. She turned over and told herself she would not think of him further, and thought of him until the candle guttered out. He wrote to her on the third day after his return. The letter was short and asked 3 questions about the North Field and 1 about the mill lease. She answered it in a longer letter than she meant to, because once she had begun, she found she wanted him to understand the land, its exhausted stretches and its unspent ones, the corners her father had let go and the corners he had failed to sell, and she wrote until the light went. She wrote nothing personal. She wrote nothing about York. She sealed the letter and gave it to the boy who came from the village, and then when he was gone up the lane, she sat down on the settle in the hall and pressed her hands flat on her knees and said aloud to no one, "Do not be a fool, Honora." Her voice sounded very steady, which she took as a bad sign. He wrote again a week later. And, again. By the middle of February, they had exchanged 14 letters. And she knew that his mother had died when he was 10, and that his father had been the sort of man about whom one said very little in company, and that he had a younger brother in the army, whose letters he answered the day they arrived, and that he did not like being flattered by strangers, and that the roof of Ashcombe Priory leaked in 3 places. All of them, he wrote, in rooms he had thought sound, which he took as a lesson about self-deception. She knew nothing about his politics, his religion, or the size of his fortune. She knew he had a niece. The niece was named Isolde, and she was 7, and she was the daughter of the Duke's dead sister, and she had come to live at the Priory a year ago, when her father, who had been an army surgeon, had died in Portugal. And Isolde, wrote the Duke in the shortest letter of the 14, does not speak. Not since October. She has not been mute since birth. She has been mute since October. And I do not know what to do. Honora read the letter twice, and then she went to the window and looked at the beeches on the drive, which were black and wet and shining, and she thought about a child of 7 who had decided to stop using her voice in October. And she felt something come loose in her chest that she had thought fastened down for good. She wrote back that evening. She did not, in the letter, tell the Duke what to do about the niece. She told him instead about her own mother's death, and about how, for 11 weeks afterwards, she had been unable to eat anything cooked in the kitchen where her mother had last stood, and how her father had not remarked on it, and had simply had a small brazier set up in the stillroom, on which she cooked her own food for 11 weeks, until the day she had walked into the kitchen and put a kettle on the range, and no one had said a word. She wrote, "I do not know your niece, your grace, and I do not presume to. But children who have decided a thing have almost always decided it for a reason. And the reason is often not the one a grown person would guess. If you can find the reason, you need not undo the silence. The silence will undo itself." She did not expect him to answer at once. He answered the same day by the returning postboy, who had ridden his horse near Foundered to bring it. The letter said only, "Come to Ashcombe. I will send a carriage on Friday. There are matters I cannot write. Edward." He had not signed his name before. She sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. The fire had burnt down and she had not noticed. She thought of every reasonable objection, that a woman of her circumstances did not travel unaccompanied at a duke's summons, that she had nothing suitable to wear, that the whole county would talk, that she was, and had been for a decade, the sort of woman whom the world assumed would never be summoned by anyone. That hope was the most expensive of luxuries, and she had exactly one gown fit to wear it in. And beneath all that, quieter, she thought of a child of 7 who had gone quiet in October, and of a man who had written, "I do not know what to do," which was, she suspected, the most costly sentence he had written in his life. She wrote back, "I will come." The carriage on Friday was better sprung than any she had ridden in, and the road was very long, and the country changed as they went. It grew colder as they went north, and she had put on her mother's cloak, which was heavier than her own and had been mended twice at the shoulder, and she had put up her hair, simply because she had never learned to put it up any other way. And she carried, in a small leather case at her feet, a bundle of her father's field maps which the Duke had said in his last letter he wished to see. She did not know if that was the true reason he had sent for her. She suspected not. She was too old to pretend that anyone had sent for her only for maps. Ashcombe Priory stood at the head of a valley, and the drive was 3 miles long, and by the time they came within sight of the house, the light was going, and the windows were, for the most part, dark. She counted the lit ones as the carriage came up. 4 on the ground floor, 2 upstairs. A house that size ought to have shown 30. She thought, this house counts its candles. And then she thought, so do I. He met her at the door himself, which she had not expected. He was in ordinary country clothes, and he had, absurdly, ink on his cuff, which he saw her see, and which he did not apologize for. He said, "Miss Fairbairn, thank you for coming." "Your Grace, Edward, if you will." "Not yet, Your Grace." He inclined his head. He led her through halls colder than her own hall had been, and up a stair whose carpet had once been red, and was now the color of a bruise, and stopped at a door on the upper landing. "My niece," he said, "is in there. She will not come down to dinner. She has not come down to dinner since October. I do not force her. I do not know if that is right." He looked at Honora. "You need not go in tonight. You have traveled all day. Now, only for a moment, to say good evening." He opened the door. The room beyond was small and warm, the warmest room she suspected, in the house, and there was a fire, and a rug, and a low chair, and in the chair a girl with very fair hair and a book open on her lap, that she was not reading. The girl looked up. She looked at the Duke, and then she looked at Honora, and then she looked back at the book. She did not speak. Honora had not expected her to. "Isolde," said the Duke, "this is Miss Fairbairn. She has come from a long way." The girl did not look up. Honora crossed the room slowly and stopped at a distance she judged not to be an intrusion, and sat down on the rug, which was easier said than done, at her size, and which she managed without ceremony, because ceremony would have made it worse, and said, "Good evening, Isolde. I am not going to ask you anything. I only wanted to see the room, because your uncle wrote to me that this was the warmest room in the house, and I have been cold for 4 hours in his carriage, and I wished to sit near the fire for a moment before I dressed for dinner. May I?" The girl looked up. She looked at Honora for a long moment, considering the way a cat considers whether to leave the sill. Then she nodded once, and went back to her book. Honora sat by the fire for exactly the length of time it took to warm her hands, which was perhaps 2 minutes, and then she rose, again, without ceremony, and said, "Thank you, Isolde. Good night," and she went out. In the corridor the Duke was standing where she had left him. He said, in a voice she had not yet heard from him, "She does not like strangers in that room. She does not know me yet. She let you sit. She let me sit, because I asked, and because I asked for a small thing and named it. Children like to be asked for small named things. Grown people forget." He looked at her, and she could not read the look, and she did not try. She said, "Where am I to sleep, Your Grace, and when is dinner? I have not eaten since Doncaster." and I would rather not fall over at your table." He laughed, then. It was a short laugh, and not entirely willing, but it was a laugh, and she thought, "That is the first, and I shall count them." At dinner, they were alone. It was a very long table, and he had had a place laid at his right hand rather than at the far end, which she noted and did not remark upon. He asked her about her journey. She answered. He asked her about her mother. She answered. He did not ask her about her father, and she was grateful. Halfway through the second course, he set down his knife and said, "Miss Fairbairn, I did not bring you here for the maps." "I know." "You knew." "I suspected." "I did not know." "I brought you here," he said, "because my niece has not spoken since October, and because when I wrote to you about it, you wrote back a letter that told me something I had not thought of, and because I have sat in this house for 4 months, attempting to think of what to do about her. And I have thought of nothing. I am not," he said, and here he looked directly at his plate, "in the habit of asking for help. I do not know how to do it well. I am doing it now, badly." "You are doing it," she said. "Quite well, Your Grace. You have said what you wanted. That is the whole of it." He looked up. "Will you stay a fortnight?" "For the child?" "For the child. Yes." "Then I will stay a fortnight, on conditions." The corner of his mouth moved. "I thought you might have some." "I will not be introduced to your household as a guest, because your servants will smell it out inside a day, and it will make everything harder. Nor will I be introduced as a governess because I am not one. I will be introduced as a woman who is here at your request, to advise on a piece of land you have purchased, which is true. Anything further, you may say, if you say it at all, you will say it directly and in my hearing. I will take my meals with the child, when she will bear it, and with you, when she will not. I will not force her to speak. I will not force her to anything. If at any point I judge that I am doing harm rather than good, I will leave in the morning. And you will not detain me, and you will tell me, Your Grace, before this fortnight is out, what you believe happened to that child in October, because, you know, there was a very long silence. "I know some of it," he said at last. "Then some of it will do." He set his knife down again. "Yes, to every condition. Then I will stay." Later, when she was alone in the room they had given her, a room too large and too cold at the corners, with a fire that had been laid up too high and would go out before dawn, she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and let herself feel for 1 careful minute everything she had been refusing to feel since the letter. Then she stopped and unpinned her hair and got into bed and slept, because a woman who has said yes to a fortnight of usefulness must sleep. The first week she learned the house. She learned which servants were kind and which were watchful, and which were quietly loyal to a memory of the dead sister and would need time. She learned that Mrs. Trent the cook had been at the Priory since the Duke was a boy, and would tell her anything she asked if she asked it in the kitchen and not in the hall. She learned that the Duke rose before dawn and rode out for 2 hours, regardless of weather, and returned wet and did not complain. She learned that Isolde would sit with her by the fire in the small upstairs room in the mornings, provided Honora brought her sewing and did not attempt conversation, and that Isolde would, at intervals, look up from her book to see if Honora was still there, and that the looking up became, by the 4th day, less frequent, which Honora understood to mean the child had begun to trust that she would be. She did not force the child to eat with her. She ate breakfast in the small room with the tray, and read aloud to herself, because reading aloud to oneself is not the same as reading aloud to a child, and a child who does not wish to be read to may still overhear. From a book of natural history she had found in the library, on the habits of British birds. Isolde, on the 3rd morning, moved her chair 3 inches closer. On the 5th, she moved it 6. On the 7th, She reached out with one small finger and touched the illustration of a wren, and Honora said, without looking up, "That is a wren. I lived in a house called Wren's Hollow. My father named it that because there was one in the eaves the year he bought it." Isolde nodded and withdrew her finger and went back to her book. But the chair, Honora noticed, had come another 2 inches closer. On the 8th morning the Duke came in. But, Pan. He did not ordinarily come in. He had told Honora on the 2nd day that he had stopped coming in, because Isolde grew smaller when he did, and he could not bear it. But on the 8th morning, he came in with a letter in his hand, and a look on his face she had learned by then to read, which was the look of a man who has been given news he does not want. Isolde saw him and did not, as he had said she did, grow smaller. She looked up, and looked at him, and waited. "Isolde," he said, "your grandmother has written." The child went very still. "She has written," he said, "that she would like you to come and live with her at Marchbourne. She has written to the trustees. She has written to me. She is coming here in 3 weeks, and she would like to take you back with her." Isolde looked at Honora. Honora, who had not been asked and would not speak first, went on stitching. Isolde looked back at the Duke. Her mouth opened. It did not, this time, produce a sound, but it opened, and closed, and Honora saw the Duke see it, and saw him understand that his niece had, for the space of one indrawn breath, considered speaking to him and been unable to. He said gently, "You need not answer now. I only wanted you to know. I have not said yes. I will not say yes without asking you first." Isolde nodded, once very slightly, and went back to her book, and did not look up again that morning. In the corridor afterwards the Duke stopped by the long window that overlooked the drive, and stood with his back to her. And Honora, who had followed him out, waited. When he turned, his face was closed again. He said, "That is what I did not tell you. My sister's mother-in-law, Lady Marchbourne. She has believed since October that I am not a fit guardian, and she has been writing to the trustees about it, and I have been answering the letters, and now she has stopped writing letters and started announcing visits, and she is bringing, I understand, her solicitor." "On what grounds does she believe you unfit?" "On the grounds that Isolde does not speak, and that a child who has stopped speaking in a house is generally understood to be a child who is unhappy in that house, and that I do not entertain, I do not visit, I do not attend the assemblies, I have not remarried, I have no wife, I have no children of my own, I have not," she writes, "provided a female influence. I have." He stopped. He put his hand flat against the window frame. "She loved her son. She has not recovered from losing him. She thinks she is protecting Isolde. She is not wrong that I have failed at this. She is wrong about what would help." "How do you know she is wrong?" He turned then and looked at her and said, "Because Isolde moved her chair closer to you on the 7th morning. And she has not moved her chair closer to anyone since October. And I have watched. I sit at the top of the back stair with the door cracked and I watch. I know it is grotesque. I do not know how else to see her." Honora, whose hands had gone quite cold, said, "I did not know you watched. I know I was going to tell you. So. I did not want to at first, because I thought you would think me." He stopped. "I do not know what I thought you would think. I have not been well since October either. Miss Fairbairn, I have not said so to anyone, I am saying so to you." She said, "Sit down, Your Grace." He sat down on the window seat. She said, "You are not unfit. You are frightened. And a man who is frightened is not the same as a man who is unfit, and any court that knew the difference would say so. But we shall have to see that they know the difference." She heard herself say "we," and did not correct it. He looked at her, and he said, "Honora," she said. "Not yet," he said. "When?" She said, when we know what October was. He was silent for a long time. Then he said her father died in Portugal in August. She was told in September. In October, her mother, my sister, died of a fever she took in nursing a tenant. Isolde was in the room. Isolde had been reading to her mother. Isolde was reading aloud from a book of Psalms, when my sister said very kindly, "Please, stop, my darling. Your voice makes my head ache," and Isolde stopped, and my sister slept, and my sister did not wake. He looked at his hands. The nurse told her afterwards, in a fit of the kind of stupidity that seems to attach itself to sick rooms, that her mother had been sleeping so lightly all week, that any noise had wearied her, and that it was a mercy Isolde had been quiet at the end. Isolde has been quiet, Miss Fairbairn, since the end. She thinks she talked her mother into her grave. I have told her she did not. I have told her plainly. It has made no difference. And I no longer know how many times to say a thing, for saying it becomes another way of not being heard. Honora sat down on the window seat beside him. She did not touch him. She said, "Your Grace." She does not need to be told. She needs to be told by the right person, at the right moment, in the right words, and until then she needs to be shown that her voice was not a poison, which she will not learn from words. She will learn it from the world going on when she considers, in the corner of her mind, using her voice. She will learn it from her chair moving 3 inches closer, and 6 inches closer, and no one dying. It will take some time. We have some time. We do not, I think, have 3 weeks. No. Then I will write to Lady Marchbourne. I will write to her, not as your anything, as a woman engaged to advise on the estate, who has met the child, and who wishes to offer, out of respect for a grandmother's love, an observation. And I will observe, in that letter, that a grandmother who forces a child of 7 onto a strange road in the middle of a silence is not protecting the child. She is punishing the uncle. And a grandmother who loves her granddaughter more than she blames her son-in-law will hear it. If she does not hear it, we shall know we are dealing with something else, and we shall prepare accordingly. He said quietly, "You are formidable, Miss Fairbairn." "I am tired," she said. "There is a difference, but not perhaps a great one." She wrote the letter that night. She wrote it 4 times. The version she sent was courteous and short and made no accusation, and it named the child 3 times by her Christian name, because Honora had been at enough sickbeds to know that the people who wanted to move a child usually spoke of the child in the abstract, and the people who wanted to keep one spoke her name. Lady Marchbourne did not answer the letter. She sent, instead, her solicitor. He came a week early. He came, in fact, on the morning of the 10th day of Honora's fortnight, in a chaise that pulled up before the Priory at 10:30, and by 11 he was in the Duke's library, with a case of papers open on the desk and a small, gentlemanlike smile that Honora, who had come in with the tea because she had wished to see him. His name was Mr. Vellacott, and he was very sorry to trouble his Grace, and he had a number of matters he wished, if it were not too much, to raise the trusteeship of the late Mrs. Ashcombe's daughter, the provision, under her marriage settlement for the child's maintenance, the management of the child's inheritance in land, being certain properties in the north, held in her right through her father, the suitability, given recent circumstances, of the present arrangements. And he was so sorry, a small matter, of a purchase his Grace had lately concluded. A Wren's Hollow was it, a property, he understood, of no material value. Nothing, of course, of concern, only that the trustees, in reviewing his Grace's recent disbursements on the child's behalf, had noted the transaction, and had wondered, really only wondered, whether his Grace had perhaps confused the child's funds with his own in effecting it. Honora set down the tea tray. The Duke did not look at her. He said, The purchase of Wren's Hollow was made from my own funds. I can show you the drafts. I am sure you can, Your Grace. I am sure you can. It is only that the trustees like from time to time to see. They will see. And the property, forgive me, you purchased at a rather generous figure for a property of no material value. I purchased it at the figure the creditors set, which was, if I may say so, 3 times what any other bidder offered. There were no other bidders? Ah, the smile again. That is not, Your Grace, what I have been told. Honora stepped forward. She did not know she was going to speak until she had spoken. She said, Mr. Vellacott, forgive me. There were no other bidders because the creditors did not open the sale. My father owed money to a bank in York, and the bank instructed a private conveyance, and the Duke's offer was the only one solicited. That is a matter of record at the bank. If you have been told otherwise, you have been told by someone who wishes you to believe otherwise, which is a different thing from a fact. She did not raise her voice. And I would be glad to know the name of the person who has told you, because I keep a list of the men who have told lies about my father's estate this year, and I have not yet finished it. Mr. Vellacott looked at her for the first time. He said, And you are Miss Fairbairn, she said, of Wren's Hollow, who lived, until you sat down in that chair, under the impression that her father's estate was worth nothing. But I gather from what you have said, sir, that someone somewhere believes otherwise. I should like to know, Mr. Vellacott, who? There was a silence in the library. It was not, Honora thought, an empty silence. It was the silence of a small piece of a wall coming loose. Mr. Vellacott smiled more thinly. I speak, Miss Fairbairn, only in generalities. Then speak in particulars, sir, or do not speak at all. The Duke said, quietly, from behind his desk, Mr. Vellacott, I think we shall want to see all the papers you have brought, and I think we shall want to see them today. And I think you will send word to Lady Marchbourne that her visit next week is welcome, but that we shall be joined at it by my own solicitor and by Miss Fairbairn, and by a gentleman from the bank in York, whose name I shall write out for you. Is that agreeable? Mr. Vellacott said it was agreeable. He said it with rather less smile. When he was gone, the Duke stood at the window for a long time, and did not turn round. At last he said, Wren's Hollow is worth something. Apparently. Do you know what it is worth for? No. Neither do I. But someone does, and it is not I, and it is not you. And it is a person willing to slander me to trustees to get it, which means it is not a small matter. Miss Fairbairn, will you extend your fortnight? To what? To the resolution of it. She thought about York. She thought about her cousin's hall and the curtain across it. She thought about the way Isolde's chair had moved 6 inches, and about the way the Duke had said Honora in the corridor, and had not been permitted to say it again. She said, I will stay until we know, and then we shall decide what after. Yes, he said, then we shall. The days that followed were not, on their surface, dramatic. She wrote to the bank in York. She wrote to the solicitor her father had used before he became too proud to use any. She sat with Isolde in the mornings, and read aloud from the book of British birds, and, one afternoon, from a book of psalms that she had chosen on purpose, and which she opened without ceremony, saying only, I like this one, and reading, in a plain, unaffected voice, a psalm about waters and green pastures. And Isolde did not cry, and Isolde, when Honora had finished, reached out and turned the page, and touched, with one finger, a psalm further on, and Honora read that one too. It took, that afternoon, an hour. Isolde did not speak. But she chose the psalms. She chose 4 of them. The Duke did not come in. He sat, Honora knew, at the top of the back stair with the door cracked. She did not tell him not to. She thought there would be time later for him to come in through the door, At the end of the second week, a letter came from the bank in York, and it was longer than any letter Honora had received in her life. And it named the mortgage her father had taken on Wren's Hollow 23 years ago. It named the mortgage he had never paid off. It named the collateral he had lodged against it, which was a parcel of land 3 miles west of the house, a parcel Honora had never heard mentioned, a parcel drawn on none of the maps she had brought, because it lay on the far side of a boundary the maps did not cross, and which had, in the year of her father's death, been surveyed by a mineral company at the request of an unnamed party, and found to sit above a seam of coal not previously known and not yet declared to the land office. The unnamed party was a Mr. Roland Sculthorpe. Honora had not heard the name. The Duke had. Mr. Sculthorpe was Lady Marchbourne's late husband's nephew, and had been, until his uncle's death, the manager of the Marchbourne estates, and was now, the bank added, in a careful line, understood to be advising her ladyship in matters of business. And Mr. Sculthorpe, the letter said, had approached the bank in December, offering to purchase the mortgage from them privately, at a small premium, an offer the bank had declined only because the Duke of Ashcombe's agent had approached them the same week with a better one. "You bought the mortgage," Honora said. "I bought the mortgage in December, before I met you. Why?" "Because your father's papers came before the bank's papers. And I read them. And I did not believe the estate was worth nothing. Because it had once been worth something. And land does not become worth nothing in a single generation without a reason, and the reason your father gave was not, on the face of it, sufficient. I thought it possible he had been robbed. I did not know by whom. You did not tell me." "No, why not?" "Because I did not know what I would find, because if I had found nothing, I did not want to have lifted your hopes only to lower them. Because you were not, when I first met you, a woman who wished to have her hopes lifted by a stranger, and because I did not at that time understand what you would become to me, and I did not therefore know what I owed you." She looked at him. She said, and now, I know what I owe you, and I am telling you. That is a great deal to tell me at once." "Your Grace, Edward, not yet. When Isolde is not being taken from you." He smiled. It was the fourth smile she had counted from him, and the widest. Lady Marchbourne arrived on the appointed day in a carriage, older than she was, and with a maid who had been with her 50 years, and she came into the drawing-room of the Priory, looking like a small, tired, dignified woman who had lost too many people. She was not a caricature. Honora saw that at once. The grievance in her face was real. So was the grief. So was the fear, which showed only when she looked at Isolde, who had come down for the first time in 4 months, and sat on a low stool near Honora's chair, holding, of all things, the Book of British Birds, and did not, at the sight, quite know what to do with her hands. She did not have to do anything with them, for long. Isolde stood up. Isolde walked across the drawing-room to her grandmother. Isolde held out the book and pointed at the wren, and looked up into her grandmother's face, and said, in a voice hoarse from 4 months of being unused, "This is a wren, grandmamma." The room went entirely still. Lady Marchbourne knelt down, an old woman, on old knees, on the drawing-room carpet, and she took the book, and she looked at the wren, and she said, "Yes, my love, that is a wren. Your mother knew the wrens. Did you know she knew them?" Isolde said yes. Isolde said, "Miss Fairbairn read to me. From the Psalms I did not." She stopped. She looked at Honora. Honora nodded. Isolde looked back at her grandmother. "I did not kill Mamma." She cried without noise, the way old women cry who have cried a great deal in private, and she put her arms around the child, and the child let her, and Honora looked at the Duke, and the Duke was looking at the child, and there were tears on his face, and he did not wipe them away. Mr. Vellacott, who had come with Lady Marchborn, and who had been standing near the door with his case of papers, said, into the silence, "Your ladyship, if we might?" Lady Marchborn said, without lifting her head from her granddaughter's hair, "Mr. Vellacott, you are dismissed, your ladyship. You are dismissed, Mr. Vellacott, from this room and from my employment. Go and wait in the carriage. I will speak to you presently." He went. She did not speak to him presently. She spoke instead for a long time to the Duke and to Honora in the drawing-room with Isolde. Asleep against her shoulder, for the child having spoken, had gone to sleep as if she had been carrying for 4 months a thing too heavy to hold, and had at last set it down. Lady Marchborn spoke about Mr. Sculthorpe. She said she had trusted him. She said he had told her that the child was being neglected. She said he had shown her letters. Letters, she now understood, he had written himself. From tenants at Ashcombe, describing the Duke as a recluse. She said, "I have been a fool, your Grace, an old wanting fool. I miss my son. I have wanted to blame someone for his death, and I have blamed you. Because you are here, and he is not." She looked at Honora. "Miss Fairbairn, your letter?" I did not answer it. "I should have. You wrote her name 3 times, I noticed. I did not want to notice." "I am sorry," Honora said. "Your ladyship, come and see her in the mornings. She sits in a small warm room upstairs. She likes it very much." Lady Marchborn said she would. Mr. Sculthorpe left the county within a fortnight. He was not prosecuted. There was not, in the end, enough to prosecute him for. He had not forged, only whispered. And the whispering had been to a grandmother who now declined to remember what he had said, but he left. The mortgage on Wren's Hollow was cleared. The parcel 3 miles west of the house was surveyed properly, and the seam was there, and the Duke, who had bought the mortgage in December, held it, and by spring he was fighting, quite openly, in the land office and at the county meeting, to secure it, not for himself, but in trust for Isolde and Dadeguer. By a codicil written on the 10th of April, and witnessed by the vicar of the parish and by Mrs. Trent the cook, for the daughters of one Miss Honora Fairbairn, presently of no fixed address, should there ever be any. He gave her the codicil to read on the evening of the 10th. She read it twice. She said, "This is presumptuous, your Grace." He said, "It is. You have not asked me anything." "No, why not?" "Because I did not want you to answer out of gratitude. I wanted the codicil to exist whether you answered or not. It exists. It will exist tomorrow. It will exist whether you say yes or no, to me, tonight, or next week, or never. I do not want you to feel you owe me a yes, because I have signed a paper." She looked at him. She said, "Edward?" He looked up. She said, "I do not owe you a yes, I never did. I have not been for sale since I was 17, and I did not put myself for sale in York, and I did not put myself for sale here. If I say yes tonight, it is because I wish to. It is not because of the paper. And it is not because of gratitude. Do not say it if it is only gratitude. You would have said to me, if I were the one signing papers, I say it back." He said, "It is not gratitude. What is it?" He put down the codicil. He said, "Miss Fairbairn, Honora, I have watched you for 10 weeks. I have watched you sit on a rug, at your size, without ceremony, and ask a mute child if you might warm your hands. I have watched you write a letter to a grieving grandmother that used the child's name 3 times, because you knew it was the name and not the argument that would land. I have watched you tell a solicitor to his face that you kept a list of the men who had lied about your father this year and had not yet finished it. I have watched you be, in every room of my house, precisely who you were in the porch at Wren's Hollow, in the rain. You have not adjusted yourself once for me. You have not adjusted yourself once for anyone, Prax. I have never in my life seen a person who did not adjust themselves for someone, and I have not known until I met you that it was the thing I had been looking for. You are beautiful, Honora. I do not say that as consolation. I say it as a fact I have been sitting with for 10 weeks and have decided, tonight, to state. You are a beautiful woman, and I have loved you since the morning of the 8th day, when you came out of my niece's room, and told me that Isolde had let you sit because you had asked for a small name thing. And I did not tell you then because I did not know how, and I am telling you now because I have learned from you that the trick is not knowing how. The trick is saying it. She said, "That was a great deal of sentences, Edward." He said, "I have been saving them." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes." She said, "Yes." They were married in June, quietly, at the small church in the parish, with Isolde as the sole attendant and Lady Marchborn in the front pew, and Mrs. Trent in the second. And Honora walked in wearing a gown that had been made for her at her size, without apology, and a heavy cream silk that sat on her the way silk sits. Who did not ordinarily let his face show what he felt, watched her come up the aisle and did not once look away. And the vicar, afterwards, told Mrs. Trent that he had never in 30 years of marrying couples seen a bridegroom look at a bride with that particular expression, which he described when pressed as the expression of a man who had been cold for a very long time and had just come indoors. Wren's Hollow was kept. The roof was mended, the north field drained, the coppices replanted, though those, the Duke said, would not come to timber in his lifetime, which was, Honora said, the correct reason to plant them. The seam of coal was worked slowly and carefully under a trust for Isolde, and paid for the mending of the roof and the draining of the field. And in time, for the schoolhouse, Honora built in the village, where the schoolmistress was told, on the day she was hired, that no child in her care was to be told that her voice was tiring, or her presence at a bedside a burden, on any grounds whatever, ever, for any reason. The schoolmistress, who was a sensible woman, did not ask why. She kept the rule. Isolde grew. She spoke, at first, only to Honora, and to her uncle and to her grandmother, and then, in time, to everyone, in a clear voice that she used, as her mother had used it, with care. She called Honora from the summer of the wedding onwards Aunt Honora, and Honora did not correct her, because she had not replaced Isolde's mother and had no wish to, but on the morning of Isolde's 10th birthday, 3 years after the wedding, when Isolde came downstairs to breakfast and found Honora at the table with a small parcel in her hand, Isolde walked round the table and kissed her on the cheek and said, "Good morning, Mamma Honora," which was a name she had invented herself and which she used ever after, in exactly that form, the mother she had lost honored in the space before the comma, and the woman who had stayed named plainly after. Honora, who was not a woman who wept easily, wept. The portrait of the late Duchess that had been, which was to say of Isolde's mother, hung on in the long gallery, and Honora had on the first anniversary of her marriage sat with Isolde before it for an hour, and had asked the child to tell her 3 things about her mother that no one else knew. And Honora had written them down in a small book, and had put the book on the shelf in the small warm upstairs room, where anyone who wished to could read them. Isolde read them often. So, sometimes did the Duke. They did not have children of their own for some years, and when a daughter came at last, in the 4th spring, she was named Alice, for Isolde's mother, at Isolde's request, and Honora's insistence, and Edward's undisguised weeping. The codicil of the 10th of April was at Honora's request quietly amended to name Alice too, and the parcel 3 miles west of Wren's Hollow with its seam was held now for 2 girls, one born and one taken in, and the trust was drawn by a solicitor in York who had learned, from Honora, to write the child's name into every clause. And here is the thing about houses that count their candles. They do not, when they begin to burn brighter, forget that they once counted. Honora, walking the long gallery on a winter evening some years after her marriage, still noticed the leaks that had not been mended, and named them, and had them mended, and noticed too the servants' tired hands, and the laughter of children in the corridor pitched a shade too loud, and where a fire had been laid too high and would go out before dawn. Edward, walking beside her, noticed her noticing, and did not, as he had done in the beginning, keep the noticing to himself. He named it aloud. "You are counting again," he would say. And she would say, "I am always counting, Edward. It is only that I count different things." Now the men who had written the inventory, who had said in front of her twice that her father's estate had 0 value, did not visit again. There was no reason for them to. But once, a year after the wedding, Honora met one of them at an assembly in York, and he did not recognize her at first, because she was standing very straight and wearing a color she would not have worn a year before, and when he did recognize her, he began to apologize, and she stopped him quite gently and said, "Do not, sir. You told the truth as far as you were able to see it. It is only that you did not see very far," and she moved on. 0 value. The words came back to her sometimes, in the small hours when the house was quiet and the child was asleep in the room down the corridor, and her husband was breathing beside her in the dark. 0 value. She had lain awake with them once, in a narrow bed, in a house that was about to stop being hers, and she had believed them. She did not believe them now. She thought of the parcel 3 miles west, and the coppices that would not come to timber in his lifetime, and the codicil signed on the 10th of April, and the small warm room upstairs, where a child had once decided her voice was a poison, and had, over the course of a spring, decided otherwise. She thought of a man who had bought a mortgage in December before he had met her, because he had read her father's papers and had not believed the sum on the last page. She thought of her own steady hand in the ledgers, kept for 6 years, called competent by a duke, in a cold parlor in the rain. 0 value. The words could not stay in the house where she had come to live. They had no purchase on any surface in it. There was value in the mended roof. There was value in the drained field. There was value in the girl who had said "grandmama" in a hoarse voice by a low fire, and had not afterwards died of it. There was value in the codicil, and in the schoolhouse, and in the psalms read aloud in a small room to a child who had chosen them, and in a woman who had been told she was worth nothing, and had gone on quietly, being worth a great deal. And there was value in a man who had not adjusted his estimate of the world to what other men said of it, but had gone and looked for himself, and had found her, and had told her so. She was, she thought, on the far side of the long story, not the woman who had been chosen. She was the woman who had stayed. There is a difference, child. Stayed is the harder word. Chosen is a moment. Stayed is